Okay, so in our last section, we're going to try and be quick, but hopefully we won't go too long. We want to think about madness and medicalization, and madness as a way of getting us into this interesting process called medicalization. How has madness been treated throughout history? Foucault, who researched this issue, talks about how, looks at the history of madness in civilization. In classical and antique times, madness was actually seen as kind of extraordinary. People were thought that they were geniuses, that they were touched by God in some way. They were special people. Think of oracles in Greek mythology. As society became more rationalized, we went through what Foucault called the Great Confinement, in which we put massive medical hospitals to house people afflicted with madness, much like the one we see here, which is rather famous for being quite haunted and is now a place where you can buy a nice apartment. So this period of the Great Confinement is where we decided we had to take mad people, instead of leaving them in society, we had to confine them and keep them away from society, lest they disrupt our normal views. And today, we see madness as a mental illness, often something rooted in brain chemistry and something that can be treated through the medical field of psychiatry. So instead of madness being a religious phenomenon or an issue of the community, it has now become a medical issue. This is medicalization. Medicalization means the subsumption or life becoming under the purview of medical authority. Right? So instead of something being just part of normal life that we deal with in the family or in the community, it's now something that a doctor should treat. It's a medical problem. This is most obvious in the growth of mental health, though there are many other issues. We've seen how, for example, pre-low blood pressure became high blood pressure. It's become more medicalized in some ways. But today, being anxious, as many of us are, sadness, aging, all of these have become medical issues. Today, it's not about being old, it's about having osteoporosis or brittle bones. It's a condition and it should be treated by a doctor. Today, it's not about sadness, about, I don't know, the state of the world today. It's called depression. It's a chemical imbalance that should be treated, even though many of the treatments for depression are problematic. Today, we're not anxious about, I don't know, a lot of uncertainty, having uncertain work and uncertain futures. It's generalized anxiety disorder. It's a problem for doctors to treat. So medicalization is the social process of bringing these non-medical problems into the sphere of medical concern and control. Right? So it's not about just having an active child, it's about having a child with ADD. Even though our testosterone naturally declines as men as we grow older, particularly after the age of 30, now this is called a medical condition, a problem called low T, for example, and you can take androgen for that. So what are the different drivers of this? Patients actually are a big one. So often patients want to advocate for something becoming a medical condition. Many women suffered from a kind of generalized pain that doctors didn't take seriously because they couldn't find a source of it. Today it's called fibromyalgia. And for these women, what it means is it's kind of a legitimating thing. It's saying you really do have a real disorder because a doctor says so and there's a medical name to it. And this is why patients often will actually try to seek medicalization. Physicians drive it, doctors. They often will spot something that either is a problem or they think is a problem in their community and try to diagnose it and write studies about it. And more pharmaceutical companies are. Sure, your testosterone declines naturally, but spending on testosterone therapy has become a big, big business. Right? So pharmaceutical companies, great. They'll hire people, for example, to ghostwrite in medical journals, to legitimize different disorders, because as long as there's a disorder, they can come up with a pill for it. Let's think about bipolar disorder. In the past, this required extensive hospitalization for at least 2 weeks of depression and mania. Mania meaning there's a lot of symptoms that have to come together for you to have a manic episode, but often grandiosity, increased focus, also increased distraction, hypersexual drive. From 1970s through 1960s, there was only about 0.1% of the population diagnosed, and almost never diagnosed before 19 years of age. However, in part because of shifting definitions, now 5% of the population has some kind of bipolar disorder. So we have now a softer diagnosis of bipolar 2 and bipolar not otherwise specified, or NOS. One study even tried to say hypomanic symptoms, meaning partially manic symptoms, meaning some symptoms for a couple of days. If we think about some of these symptoms, they could also be a side effect of lack of sleep. And part of what we see is that spending on these kind of disorders has gone up extraordinarily. And this is why some argue that this is being driven by big pharma.